Michelle Marie McGrath. Welcome to Unclassified Woman, and today I'm talking to Ashleigh Mills in Australia. Ashleigh originally trained as a social worker working in clinical mental health and policy for over 10 years in Australia and abroad. At age 32, she followed a niggle in her heart to write creatively. After attending a workshop, she then started her own blog. Since this time, Ashleigh has grown her personal blog on life, love and travel at mymeow.com.au. And she also started a freelance writing business, venturing into feature and travel articles. In 2015, she travelled to Bali in the Philippines to write stories with her husband, who is a fashion and travel photographer. A crazy cat lady at heart, she's unable to sit still for long and is always planning her next adventure. She hopes her blog will inspire people to live a life they love and take time to reflect in this busy life. Find out more at mymeow.com.au, and I do hope you enjoy this episode. So, hi Ashleigh, so great to have you here today. Really looking forward to our conversation and hearing your perspective.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here after listening to all the wonderful women on this podcast so far. It's been awesome to listen to.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, they're all amazing. And it's great to have all these examples of women all around the world who are creating lives of meaning beyond our traditional paradigms.
Yeah, exactly. I thought I was all by myself, so I think it's good to hear other perspectives and women in all different roles.
Yeah, and just realise that there's actually this massive community of like-minded women, which is really heartening. And so, Ashleigh, just to give us some background, would you mind sharing a little bit about, your situation and whether you've not had a child due to personal choice or whether it's been circumstantial?
Yep, sure. I suppose I always assumed that I would one day have that urge to have a family and be a mum. But at 34, it's just never happened. So it is definitely personal choice at the moment. I always assumed meeting my husband that one day we would feel ready, we would stop travelling, I would stop doing all those things that I was doing, and we just kept putting it off year after year. It was a marathon. Then my husband, who's a photographer, had a lot of work travel one year. Then I decided to do a master's. Now I'm doing a lot of writing, and we've just never gotten to the point where we've sat down and said, okay, this is the time where we're going to do it. So I suppose the decision to be child-free came out of both of our ambivalence about making the decision. And as I got older, I'm 35 next year, which is, the age that everyone says, well, you better sort of do it now. Yeah. I watched my friends, very quickly meet people, just, find out if that other person wanted to have a baby, and they're all sort of having babies straight away. And James and I were watching them, and it actually forced us to sit down and say, well, what do we want out of our life? What fulfills us? Is having children a part of that? And at the moment it's not. So
Yeah. And I think what you say is a really common scenario where so many people do feel ambivalent, and they're kind of, they don't feel strongly enough to make that happen. They don't feel that urge. So many women I've heard say, well, I've never had that biological clock ticking, that other friends talk about. And so if I'm not feeling it strongly, then I don't feel I should try and make that happen.
Exactly. But when you explain that to people, they say some really weird things like, just do it anyway. I didn't want one, and then I had one and it was fine. And all
it's ridiculous. It's not like getting a kitten, is it?
I know. It's your whole life. And I think, in my previous life as a social worker, I've seen the effects of families split up, terrible parents, all that sort of stuff. And I just think unless you're 120% committed and you both want to do it, you both want to parent and spend, 20 years or the rest of your lives doing it, then you shouldn't do it.
No, and there are plenty of children already in the world who need care and support.
Exactly.
If you want to go down that path. So, yeah, very interesting people's attitudes. And did you feel any pressure from like your friends and family? Like you said, you did have some of those comments like, well, just have one anyway.
I think at the beginning, as soon as we got married, people ask, when you get engaged, when you're getting married, you get married. Then they start asking when you're having a baby. So there was a lot of that to start with. Not so much from my parents. I think my mum is very, compared to when she was growing up, she's excited that women can have a career and travel and do all this stuff that just wasn't available when she was growing up. You could be a nurse or a teacher or...
Yeah, more traditional.
Yeah. Still
caring roles, though, aren't they? Still very nurturing roles.
Yeah. So they're very much just live your life and be happy. But, yeah, a lot of sort of friends, even friends' parents, when I would run into them in the shops would say, haven't you had a baby yet? Don't you like children? One of them said to me. And I just thought, imagine if I had been, going through IVF or devastated that we couldn't have one. How does this person know that I'm not in that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So insensitive, really, unintentionally.
Yeah.
But you just don't know what people's personal situations are with something that is a very personal topic.
Exactly. And I've got friends who are desperately, going through IVF and, injecting themselves every day with hormones. And I absolutely, hope that they don't get asked those questions, because it would be devastating to, someone who felt that it was missing from their life.
Yeah. And so... yeah, it's just such a sensitive topic, and it is interesting how people feel they have the right to question such a thing, really. But again, it's all part of how we're conditioned in our society, and that is, in inverted commas, the norm.
I think also people, once they've had children and they do bring people so much joy that they can't imagine life without them. So they can't imagine life without their kids. So therefore they're sort of projecting onto you, well, it made me happy, so it'll make you happy too.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. Yeah. But I think over time people have stopped asking. I've written a lot about it on my blog, and I think that's been a way of
communicating,
sort of sharing. Now I think we're just sort of going on with life.
And so it's interesting because I've spoken to a number of women who feel ambivalent, and yet even though they've been quite clear that maybe this is not the right thing for me, some of them have still gone through like a grieving process of letting go of that idea or that notion as a possible outcome for their life. I was discussing this topic just recently with an author, Megan Dorm, who's the author of Selfish, Shallow and Self-Absorbed, which was an anthology that came out earlier this year. It was 16 writers on their conscious choice not to have children.
Yeah.
And one of the points in that really struck me that she said was that people often confuse, self-knowledge with self-absorption. Whereby they totally misunderstand a person's decision in thinking, well, they're completely self-absorbed, like as though that's a really negative thing. And it's like, no, actually, they've taken a long time to really consider this possibility in their life. And the decision has come then from really questioning their motivation, looking at it from exploring all aspects of it. And they've really, really often agonized over this with a lot of awareness. And so then come to the conclusion that this is just not right for me. And obviously there are so many different reasons for that depending on the individual.
Exactly. And I think in the beginning, when I was very confused about this, I sort of went around and asked all my friends, how did you decide to have a baby? And a lot of them just said, oh, I just did. I didn't think about it like you are now. I knew that I wanted to be a mum from an early age, and some people did. But for a lot of people, I think they just go along with the path and that's what's next. And a lot of people that I spoke to, I think, you know, having a second or a third child, there's a lot more sort of decision-making about that.
Yeah.
But they certainly didn't, you know, weigh up everything like people I know that have decided to not have children.
Yeah. And so it's interesting. So where are you at with that now, and how do you feel then that you are expressing, because we all nurture and produce and create in all sorts of different ways in our lives. And so how would you say that you're using those qualities like in a different way?
Definitely through my writing and the blog. I actually think that I started writing to sort of get this kind of decision out of my head.
Yeah.
And it just led to me following my instinct to be more creative. So I started a blog. I started a creative writing business. At the moment, I'm not working, so I've just quit my job to pursue that over the next 12 months.
Great.
So certainly, you know, my blog, I'm so proud of it because I did all the coding myself, and I'm not a technical person. And,
wow,
you know, it's something that I've grown, and I've grown an audience. So I certainly put a lot of energy and love into that. But also I think being child-free allows you to nurture relationships with other children, like my niece and nephews. You know, I love them. I'm so close to them, and I can support my sister in a way that I couldn't if I had my own family.
Absolutely.
And when I was growing up, I actually had a lot of child-free women around me. My godmother, my dad's secretary, who sort of became very close to our family, and a teacher that I actually still write to, that I have been since I was 12. So I kind of had these strong women around me that didn't have children that gave me a lot of guidance and support.
Well, that's great that you had those role models so that you could to kind of normalise that as an option.
Exactly. And I think, you know, my parents were only children, so without those women, it would have been quite lonely for them and for us, but they were like fairy godmothers, you know?
Yeah. So, no, well, that's great. That's great that you've had those kind of examples that are living and breathing in your life so close. Yeah. And so some of the things that we've been exploring is looking at certain myths and stereotypes that we're exposed to. And so I guess for you, you've had those positive role models in your life of women who didn't have children. And so you could see that that was a valid option and that they had other things going on in their lives. But what are some of the myths and the stereotypes that you've come up against personally?
A lot of people ask weird things like, you know, you'll be alone when you're old, and you and James would make great parents. Yes, we would, but, you know, I could also be a great marathon runner or something else. Doesn't mean I have to do it. Yeah. So that sort of stuff, I think, you know, and I've kind of read a lot on this topic now, and there's no research saying that, you know, people in their older age are happier with children or happier without. It's all about community and keeping your connections. And, you know, I've got no reason to think that my sister and all my friends will just suddenly stop talking to me when I'm 70.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think that sort of stuff, you know, has been the things that people say to me, or life didn't have meaning, or life is empty. And so a few
But
people.
that says more about them, doesn't it? That if their life was empty without a child, whereas I think if you are fulfilled and happy in yourself, then maybe you wouldn't be looking to a child to provide that for you.
And I think as well in your relationship, I was listening to, was it the Joy Junkie Amy?
Yes.
And I loved her
Amy
podcast.
Smith, she's great.
And she was saying, you know, in her marriage and her relationship, she just feels like nothing is missing. And I feel exactly the same way about James.
Yeah.
Like our life is full, you know, we have plans together. We love our free time. He's a photographer. He travels a lot. He's into paragliding. And so we just, you know, we just have this beautiful relationship where we have our goals together but also love having time apart. And I don't feel like anything is missing from that.
Yeah. And I've had conversations with friends who've said, well, I really want to take our relationship to the next level, or I want to experience more closeness with my husband. And so they see having a child as that's the way they want to do that. So it's just interesting. And I would think that especially in the first couple of years when you're sleep deprived and adjusting to, you know, one of the biggest transformations you could ever go through, you're probably not really having any quality time with a partner. But it's interesting that we're still sold these types of myths within our society to keep that kind of, it's almost like this fantasy of motherhood going, really. And I'm not saying, of course, there's so much joy there as well, but it's also very challenging. And obviously that's an understatement, but you know, the reality is it's not all one way.
No, and I think as well, particularly living in Sydney, it's very expensive. You have to have both parents working full time. Then the children are off to childcare. On the weekend, you're ferrying them around to parties and events and things like that. And it's hard. You don't have time for yourself. And a lot of my friends have said to me, I wish people were more honest with me about how hard it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, that's an interesting topic in that many mothers don't feel able to be honest publicly about how difficult it can be because they often then receive a lot of judgment and criticism.
Exactly.
So I think whether you're a mother or not, often we're kind of held to these unrealistic expectations of womanhood when in actual fact what we need to do is support each other in defining whatever womanhood means to each individual, and that's going to be different for every person, and that's what we need to recognise.
Exactly. And I think there's so much pressure now to, you know, be the perfect mum, bake your own raw food, all this kind of jazz, go to the gym, have a life purpose, write a book, have a career.
Yeah.
You're just meant to do everything, and
whilst travelling around the world at the same time.
Oh, it's just ridiculous. Yeah. So I think if being a mum fulfills you and it's your thing and you love doing that, or you want to have 20 cats, or you want to write a book, or, you know, each to their own, I just think we should all support each other's choices and decisions.
Absolutely. And how do you think we can bring in more tolerance to each other in this way?
I think the stereotyping and the pressure for women is huge. And even just, I was looking at the Women's Day the other day, they're all pregnant celebrities, you know, post-gym bodies, all this sort of stuff. So I think it starts with the media and how, you know, the ideal life is portrayed and things like that, but just being kinder to each other. And I think the judging, you know, between women is huge a lot of the time. I do this, why don't you do that? Even just about, you know, opinions or decisions or, you know, pulling your kids out of school to travel for 6 months. We just need to let people get on with their own lives without judging others.
Absolutely. We can never know what's right really for somebody else. I mean, often, you know, it's a full-time job to follow and find what's right for yourself sometimes.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for your time today, Ashleigh. Now, where can we find your blog online?
So I blog about life, love and travel, and sometimes there's a crazy cat lady post at www.mymeow.com.au.
And so that's meow as in the noise the cat makes.
EOW, yep.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much and so great to speak to you today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Unclassified Woman. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. For information on events and services, connect with Michelle at michellemariemcgrath.com.